played it very, very, very well indeed.
No more slices for you.
Oh, look at that for judgment.
You'll learn.
Hello everybody and welcome to Slice, sponsored by True Links, where Ben and Sam here with another bonus episode. Now, I was about to, off mic, ask Sam when we're releasing this episode and therefore know whether to say there are two in quick succession after you and Murray, which hopefully everyone has heard by now. Don't know when this is hitting the podcast airwaves.
It'll be Wednesday, Ben.
Wednesday.
Yeah.
Great. What an Easter treat for our subscribers. But we're delighted to be joined by Meghan MacLaren. Meghan, hello, first of all. It's nice to speak to you again. I think we spoke like 7 years ago in my first attempt to become a podcaster, and here I am giving it another go.
There you go. The last time I played well, probably. No.
Well, perhaps our careers are in parallel in some way, because obviously we're speaking to you now, actually, you know, on a really good run of form, a fruitful Australian swing. I know Australia's been kind to you in the past. Is there something about being down there? Is it the sunshine, the golf courses? Are you an architecture buff, or is it something else?
Well, the coffee wasn't on that list, so that's definitely top of the list of reasons why I like Australia. But I don't know, like, obviously everybody asks me why I play so well out there, and I have to remind them that I've also played not well out there as well. But it's just, I mean, I don't know if either of you guys have been, but it's an amazing country. Like, it's hard not to like it. And I think once we get out there, because we're out there for a little stretch of time, it's nice just to feel settled and kind of just embrace yourself in the culture and stuff. So it's just a great place to be.
Well, my cousin, who's also like one of my best friends, moved to Australia about 18 months ago, and he's keen for me to go out there. But I'm a bit of an oversharer, sorry. I'm an arachnophobe, and that is the one thing that is going to put me off going. So, honest answer, Meghan, how big's the biggest spider you saw in your time in Australia, and how often do you see them?
Actually, I didn't see any this trip that I remember. I know a couple of my friends have, like, in the past, sort of biggest spider they've ever seen has been out there. But
yeah, I'm not going.
I mean, I don't know if you would have seen this on social media, but I found a snake in my flat in Milton Keynes last year. So if you can have stuff like that happen in England, then I don't think you should be too worried about what you'll find elsewhere.
Okay, your message is you're not safe anyway. That's just what exactly. I need to hear. So obviously, we're early in the year when we're speaking to you. Does it free you up for the rest of the year, feeling like, you know, you've got points and money in the bank, as it were, and you're set up nicely for the rest of the year? I'm sure you want to make sure that form in Australia lasts right the way through to the end of the season.
Yeah, definitely. I think because of how the last couple of years have been for me, even though I feel like this is kind of the level that I'm playing at again, and it feels like this is what I expect from myself now, it's still nice to just start the year like that, because, you know, you can feel like you're playing reasonably well and you can feel a bit more confident and everything. But if you don't get results on the board early, it can creep in quite quickly of like, oh, you know, I'm lagging behind with the points and stuff. And because of the way the points work on our tour, it's very top heavy. So you can make quite a lot of cuts, but if you're finishing kind of 40th or 50th, you're not really actually making any headway. So it's nice just to have, like you said, to have that weight off my shoulders and kind of almost look at it more of okay, now I have a chance to play my way into the majors and stuff like that, rather than, okay, I need to do well in the first couple of months to kind of free myself up.
In terms of the rest of the season, anywhere else you're particularly looking forward to getting? I'm sure getting back to Europe and, you know, Australia is great, but there's a lot of travel, a lot of expenses and stuff like that. But anywhere else you're particularly looking forward to playing?
Yeah, I mean, the next trip is South Africa, and then we go to Mauritius off the back of that, which is a new event. So obviously that's, you know, even though it's a long way, that's going to be pretty cool to see somewhere new. I think there's a lot of staff and a lot of kind of plus ones making a bit of a trip out of that one. But yeah, getting back to Europe will be nice, and like I said, trying to play my way into the Open, into Evian. That's kind of stuff that I'd be really trying to target.
Just quickly on Evian, what's your take on the golf course? Because I know for some, you know, it is quirky, isn't it? Do you like that challenge or?
I do, yeah. I've got a bit of a love-hate relationship with Evian because it used to be, obviously it was like an LET event before it became a major, and there's still like a mini version of it, if you like, as an LET event earlier in the year. Um, and I've played well there in the past, but I've also been like quite heavily scarred by it because if you're like a tiny bit off, you just get absolutely punished. But I always feel like with Evian, if you look at the list of winners, like you can't really argue with how it separates the best players in the world because I actually think it's got probably the best winners list of any of the majors over the last 10 years. So I feel like if you're looking at that as a means of kind of testing the players in kind of the most well-rounded way, it's hard to argue with that.
It's all like the sawgrass of the ladies' game, ish.
I'm not I'm not sure many other people would use that comparison, but no,
in
I
terms of the
I
in
really like
terms of
it.
bringing the best to the top.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But yeah,
I
there
thought you
are
were going to say DLF, Sam. I was thinking about that when you said how punishing it is for being slightly off. I was thinking DLF, but
I think
um,
it's one of those courses where they have to have certain things like the greens can't be too firm, otherwise it just gets a bit silly. And if it gets windy and stuff, but yeah, I like it overall.
I wanted to ask Megan about your writing and some of your kind of struggles as well. Not to go too sort of heavy too soon, but obviously I know I imagine a lot of people listening to this will already know that you're an excellent writer and you've got a blog where you chronicle many aspects of the game and your own journey and struggles. I want to know where that particular skill sort of came from. Is that something you've done from a young age, and what kind of inspired you to start doing that regularly?
Yeah, it's I don't really know where it came from initially. Like I've read a lot whenever I was a kid, which maybe helped. And my mum and dad are both, they're both articulate, educated people. But I think it was just one of those gradual things. And then I studied English at university and I did politics as well. So it was like I just got used to writing a lot. Like I just had to do it all the time. Um, and I think it just helped me like shape my thoughts. I've always been somebody who's quite introspective. And I think it just became a bit of an outlet for me to kind of make sense of them myself. Never mind if anybody else wanted to read them or not. That bit always surprised me. Um, so yeah, I think it was just something I got used to, and the more you do something, hopefully the better you get at it. Although it doesn't always hold true in golf, so I don't know.
You've been very open on there about your struggles, and that's refreshing. To have a professional golfer who's prepared to sort of write about the hard stuff. If you're kind of happy to go there, can you talk us through what your lowest point has been in recent years, and what did that look like?
Yeah, there's a couple that kind of spring to mind. I had a week at the Swiss Open in 2024 where it was just because I'd been struggling for a while, but I felt like I'd made some progress. I was working with a psychologist. I'd taken a bit of a break to try and like get rid of some of the anxiety that had come from playing so badly and stuff. So I felt like I was making progress, and then I went to the Swiss Open, and the first round there, I've never felt anything like that before. Where I stood on a par three, like third hole or something, and it's like a long iron, but you've got a ton of room. Um, and I hit a shot. I think I hit a shot left into the trees or something, and I didn't know where it was, so I had to hit another one. And I stood there over the ball, and I was like, if this ball doesn't find the green, like I might have to walk in off the golf course because the like severity of what I was feeling was just like I don't know how to get this ball onto the green or anywhere in play. And just like strength and intensity of that feeling was so much. So I somehow survived the round, and I got in and I went into scoring, and whenever I came out scoring, I just like had a breakdown basically. So I was just at that point I was like, I don't see a way through this because I'd already done quite a lot of stuff to try and get myself back on track. And it was just to kind of feel that lost at that point, having already done quite a lot of work to try and change things. I was just like, I don't I don't know where I go from here. So that was probably like, that's the one that's kind of sticks to mind the most.
Yeah, and you mentioned working with a psychologist. Is that something you're still doing now? And has that, have you maybe the length of time you've been doing that? Are you now seeing the results of that, or is that something else entirely?
Funny enough, not really. No, I, I did that work for a while, but I think over time it became, it's like I needed different things at different times. And that same year, so 2024, I'd worked with a guy for quite a long time, from a psychologist point of view. And it helped in stages, but it never really got to the bottom of what the issues were. And without going into too much detail, because there's like a whole chain of things that happened that I could talk about for hours. But towards the end of the year, I had another sort of lowest moment kind of situation at the French Open, which is somewhere that the previous 2 years I'd come second and third. And then I went there and shot like 81 or something and was pretty much last. And I was like, I can't, like, I've got to do something here. So I went back to my old coach. And I was incredibly lucky and grateful that he sort of answered my message, because it was kind of a point of like, I've got nowhere else to go. He's kind of the only one that might be able to give me some answers. So I sent him this really long message and he called me straight away after, like, I guess it would have been about 18 months of kind of no contact, which I feel like is such a like big person thing to do. A lot of people let their egos get in the way, and once you leave, they're not interested anymore. But he sort of always cared about me and was willing to go, okay, she needs help and I'm going to be there to give her help. So it was kind of just a long-winded answer to your question, but it was working with him that kind of got me back on track. And I think from there, it was kind of the next turning point after that, which kind of took a year to happen. It was like a mental thing, but it was kind of something I had to do on my own rather than find somebody else to give me answers. It was kind of like a decision that I had to make of like, okay, my golf's in a better place. I now have to decide to kind of treat myself as a good golfer again, rather than somebody who's trying to just find their feet, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That blend of like the technical and the mental, it's obviously not unique to golf, but it's so visceral in golf, isn't it? Like, and I'm fascinated as a bad golfer who is actually later today going to try and swing a golf club for the first time this year, because I got to play with Sam in 10 days or so. But like, that fascinates me, this idea that you can quote unquote master your profession. You can be one of the best 100, one of the best 200, whatever it is, like genuinely towards the very top of your profession. And yet what you're doing from a technical perspective is like always evolving. And it's not, in essence, I guess, to pick a sport, a footballer, generally speaking, they master their profession and they do it the same way with some little tactical tweaks from someone else. But for a golfer, Megan, how difficult is that to feel like what you've got today, you might not have next week, and you've got to find a path through that, both mentally, but also technically?
Yeah, I think it's one of the hardest things in golf. And it's, looking back, it's, there's no point in me doing this now, but whenever my sort of struggles really started, it all came from a decision of trying to get better, which I think to me is the hardest part of golf, is you never know when you're one step away from like screwing everything up. And I also think as a coach, that's a really difficult thing to manage with professional golfers, because a lot of like a blueprint for success, you don't necessarily know exactly what's in that blueprint. So, everybody wants their swing to look a certain way, to perform a certain way. But sometimes a lot of what you do that's good, you don't necessarily understand. So it's quite difficult for coaches as well to be able to separate, like, okay, this is what makes a player really good. How do I improve that with them without kind of taking away some of the things that they're good at, almost instinctively? And I think being able to manage that on your own is obviously like a major part of being a professional golfer. And I think it's something I've always done, I don't know, I wouldn't say well, but reasonably well whenever I've been at my best, is you just go out and play with what you have on the day. And I think that bit in itself is I quite enjoy. It's like, okay, I don't have my A game, but can I still put a score together? But I think it's more when you go through periods of time where you're like, okay, I think I'm a little bit lacking in this department or that department, is kind of what you do with that and the decisions you make from those places that can really dictate what happens to you long term.
I don't want to. I've always thought Dustin Johnson's probably a bit cleverer than he lets on. But have you ever? Obviously, you've said you're introspective and you're obviously analytical. But have you ever wished you could be one of those golfers that must exist on all tours, really? That are just like, whatever. It's just a ball. I just get it in the hole. It'll be fine.
Yeah, a lot of times. But like, I think over the years, you kind of learn like, this is who I am. How do I make it work for me? And you have to kind of see it as a strength if you can. And I think I've always kind of liked, there's a quote that's something like, your biggest strength is your biggest weakness as well. And you just have to learn to know when it's kind of sliding into the kind of harming you rather than helping you. But that's kind of one of the things I've done quite a lot of work on over the past 6 months is this is who I am. This is like how I see my identity as a golfer and a person, and trying to actually use those things together to be successful rather than thinking that something's going to get in my way.
I definitely don't think Dustin Johnson does a lot of quoting, so immediately a distinction.
When you say working on, Megan, is that just yourself working on, or working with someone on?
There's kind of just been by myself. So my other half, Becky Brewerton, is like a big help in terms of bouncing ideas off and helping me understand myself as well. But kind of towards the end of last year, I knew I was going to have to go back to Q school, but I knew my golf was in a much better place. So I had kind of 6 weeks without any tournaments. And I feel like that time really helped me work out like, okay, how do I go from being in this kind of like tentatively okay place to being like confident in my ability. Like I've won tournaments in the past and I feel like I'm a better golfer now than I was then. So how do I bridge that gap again? So I did quite a lot of just like reading and writing and introspection and all those things that maybe a Dustin Johnson wouldn't do, but like it works for me. And that really like helped me massively, to be honest.
Without trying to give Ben too much credit here, that was something I tried to actively avoid. He mentioned on the pod a few months ago how he felt that you and Eddie Pepperell are sort of strangely linked in terms of your careers and the past of your careers. And you sent us a message recently saying that you thought the same thing, which is interesting. But I wondered if you could talk us more about the sort of similarities as you see them. And do you know Eddie at all?
I don't really know him. We played together once or twice. And I think like he definitely replied to a couple of my blogs over the years. So I think we're like aware of each other without knowing each other that well. But there was obviously like whenever we were both doing well at the same time in kind of probably 2019-ish, there were obviously like a few comparisons drawn between us because I think we were both writing a bit more at that point as well. So like from my perspective, I always felt a little bit connected to him in that sense. I highly doubt that he felt the same way, but it's just something that like has kind of been on my radar a little bit. And obviously because he's kept his presence like in the golf media landscape, even while he's been struggling. I think I've always been kind of aware about what his career is doing. And I enjoy listening to him or reading his thoughts on what's happening to him and why he thinks it's happening to him. But it's funny because I think I mentioned this in something that I put, but it's almost like the more I listen and read those things from him, the more I think we're quite different in how we approach golf. But it's very, very interesting how our careers have kind of mirrored each other quite a bit, to the point of us both, I think we both missed getting our card back last year by a shot or two. And then this year we both got our cards back at Q School. So it's just quite an odd kind of mirroring of each other. But hopefully we can both, go on and do well now.
If it makes you feel any better, Sam, it's the only thing I've been right about so far this year. So call it one.
Well, and also, hopefully Eddie gets back to writing because, like yourself, he was always a fascinating person to read his thoughts.
Too busy now. He's a podcast star. We podcasters can't do everything, Sam.
I wanted to just look back a little bit, Meghan. I'm going to go back 10 years. I'm going to say, if you could go back 10 years and give advice to your 21-year-old self who just turned pro, what would you say?
That's a good question. It's funny because Rue always used to say to me whenever I had like low moments, she'd always be like, "It's going to feel worse than this," and I was like, that doesn't seem like a very helpful thing to say, but it's quite interesting because I think the point is like, however, like when you're struggling early on, you think the whole world is ending, and it's not. Like you're actually in quite a good place. You miss a cut or two, or you have a high score when you're in the final group, and like you think your whole career's over. But it's like it can get way, way, way worse than that. So I think the point I'm trying to make is like you should never get too low and you should never get too high. And that's kind of maybe the lesson I would take from everything that's happened. I do think it's important to like feel everything. I don't think you should pretend that things don't matter to you. But I think in terms of a career, like you're going to go through so much, and you can't let those low points kind of affect your belief about yourself and your belief about who you are as a person. Because if you believe that you get to a certain point for a reason, the things that I think made me successful early on, they're all still true. Just because I struggled, it doesn't mean they're not still real things. So I think it's easy to lose sight of that when you're struggling.
That's a good mantra for life generally, I think. Don't get too high or too low. Try and has your definition of success changed since then? Since when you turned pro, would you say?
I don't know. That's quite an interesting one because I think my goals are still the same. Like even whenever I was an amateur golfer, I always wanted to be like the best version of myself, and to, that probably sounds a bit cliche, but I was always excited to see like if I can get as close as I can to my potential, what can I achieve? And I think that's still true. That success might be different now to what it was 10 years ago, but it could also be like a higher expectation than I had back then. So I think it's always for me just about kind of using my character to be as good of a golfer as I can be, if that makes sense.
You've mentioned wanting to get into the majors, getting into Evian and the Women's Open. Any other goals? Are you a big goal setter, like in terms of not a process goal but an outcome goal?
I don't know. I go back and forth with that because there's quite a lot of like, you should always be focused on the process and not an outcome. But you also like you want to achieve stuff as a professional athlete. Like I think it's pointless to pretend that you don't. But I think a big thing that I did towards the end of last year was kind of break it down a bit more. So to go, okay, I want to play in the majors. I want to be in contention in the majors. Like I want to win the Order of Merit. I want to win tournaments. And I don't think it's like wrong to want those things. But for me, it's a lot about, okay, how do you actually do that? Because it's one thing to say you want those things, but everybody wants those things. You can't just go and practice and go, oh, I'm practicing today because I want to win the Order of Merit. It's like, well, what does it actually take to win the Order of Merit? Like, for me, what things do I have to do to make that happen? And also in golf, I think a lot of people forget at the end of the day, you just have to put scores together. Like if your scoring average is under 70, you're going to come close to winning the Order of Merit. You're going to come close to winning a lot of tournaments. So like from an individual point of view, how do I make that happen as often as I can? So for me, it's just like about going, yeah, I do have outcome goals, but I'm not going to achieve those if I don't kind of set set processes to kind of be capable of different things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And how much does things like statistics go into that process and sort of identifying what you need to improve? Because I know obviously when Sam and I talk about the DP World Tour probably more than we do the PGA Tour. In fact, we definitely do. But on the PGA Tour, obviously, every single thing is measured. When I was writing my preview for this week's event, I was looking at club head speed and ball speed and, all these different things that I can get at the click of a button. Now, we, on this side of the fence, don't have access to that data beyond the LPGA Tour, which is still pretty early. Do you gather it? Do you have processes like that where you're looking at strokes gain data and trying to apply it to your game? And do you let it influence things like how you play a hole even?
Yeah, I've always been like massive on stats, like right from when I was sort of 15, 16 in the England setup. They were really good at sort of making us do that. And I think because I've done it for so long, I've always had quite clear data for myself. Like, okay, when I've played my best, these are the numbers that I expect to see, which I think has been a really, really helpful thing over the years. There's definitely less data to sort of compare to other players, which is something that it still frustrates me that I can't go the best putter on the LPGA holds this percentage from 5 to 10 foot, like, because those numbers are there somewhere because I know they keep their data now. But for you guys in the media, for me as a player, for just fans who want to see that kind of stuff, it's not easy to do, which is frustrating. But yeah, for me, like, data's always been really important. I've had to back away from it at times because you can definitely get too deep within it as a player. But in answer to the second part of your question, I've never really used it to influence how I play holes. There's probably still not enough data on golf courses themselves to be able to go, okay, last year X amount of the field made birdie from hitting it, hitting driver off the tee or whatever. But I don't really mind that because I've always been like, I would rather just play to my strengths anyway. For me, it's actually more frustrating because I think the way I play golf has always been like relatively intelligent. And it's like the more that other people have access to information like that, I'm like, no, like I don't want them to have that. Like I want to be able to keep my strengths, but that's just the way the world is, and you have to keep trying to evolve as a person as well.
I'd just ask you one more question on this because we spoke about it a little bit recently. This is my opinion only. I tend to find in the commentary box, I guess it's easier for people who have played the game at a high level, and obviously I certainly haven't, but it's easier for them sometimes to criticize golfers for the decision they make rather than say, oh, that was a bad shot, because obviously they can't diagnose a bad shot really, except where it's gone in the moment. And I find that too often, and a good example was Ludwig Ahlberg when he hit driver off the 12th tee at Sawgrass. The criticism was the decision rather than the fact that an elite golfer has hit a snap hook. Now, in that moment, I guess I want to ask, what I'm trying to ask is, when you're in contention, to what extent does how you feel in the moment and the leaderboard and all those other factors that you couldn't have planned for anyway influence your shot? Are there times where you've been stood on a tee and just thought, do you know what, I feel really good, I'm going to hit driver, when yesterday it was a 3-iron, for instance? Yeah,
definitely. It does. It's funny because in the past, quite often I'll think to myself, your strategy is your strategy and it shouldn't necessarily change depending on how you feel. But there are situations where you have to, I think it's worth changing depending on how you feel. Even like something as simple as adrenaline might change the club that you hit. And you just have to be aware of that. But even in Australia, one of the tournaments recently, there was a par 5 and it was only the third round, I think, and I was maybe like 4 shots behind. And I kind of had it in, so it was one of the ones that Hannah Green won, which doesn't really narrow it down. But I was playing with her and she was playing really well. And I'd kind of settled into my round and I was playing better. But I was like, this is a top 10 player in the world. Like she's not going to go away. I can't wait for her to make mistakes. So I was in a position on a par 5 where I couldn't reach the green, but I could get within 30 yards. But that had never been my strategy on that hole. Like, not once. I hadn't even considered it. So I didn't really know what the risks were if I took it on. But in the moment, I was like, if I want to win this tournament, like, there are certain times where you just have to be more aggressive. And like, there might be data people that disagree with me, and it just so happened that I made a 4, I made a birdie playing it that way, taking it on, being aggressive. And the other 2 that I was playing with didn't. They made a par and a bogey. But it's like, sometimes I think you just have to react to the situation. And we talk quite a lot about, like, you have to put your big girl pants on sometimes. You just have to, like, stand up, and if you want to win a tournament, like, you've got to do things like that sometimes.
I want to ask Megan about some Solheim Cup stuff, because you've been close to making a team before, notably 2019. And I wonder, were you ever involved in discussions with Katrina Matthew that year? And and if so, how did you find playing with that target of trying to make the team, or thinking you were close to making it?
It's funny, it feels so long ago, even though it's not really that long ago. But yeah, it's funny because I started that year really well. So I was kind of on the radar, and I had a couple of messages from Katrina Matthew, which was really, like, encouraging for me early in the year. And then I picked up a little injury kind of halfway through that year. And I didn't really play very well whenever it counted, like in the majors and kind of in the bigger events whenever it got close to it. So in my head, I was never on the radar after that initial kind of couple of months of the season. I was like, I'm miles away. But funny enough, Katrina Matthews still called me, like, I guess the day before the teams got announced, which to be honest, really, really surprised me, because she called me and she was like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And I was like, "You literally don't need to be calling me." I almost felt quite embarrassed that she called me, because I was so, like, in my head, I was so far away. And I played, because she was still playing a bit at that point. So I got drawn with her in a tournament at some point that year. And that was quite like, okay, the only reason I'm playing with her is so she can sort of suss me out for Solheim. So I found that quite difficult, because at the time I knew I wasn't playing great, and I was like, this isn't really, I'm not doing myself any favors here, but it's all part of it. And I think even to experience that then, even if I didn't really feel like I earned my right to do that, it's still hopefully something that will only help me moving forward.
Do you like it sitting separate from the Ryder Cup? Because obviously we've had them in the same year before, fairly recently, and I just wondered, like, I see pros and cons for both, I guess, but as a golf fan, and particularly a fan of watching those 2 events and the Walker Cup, like, having them spread out is nice, but I can see an argument that having them run back to back, potentially even at the same golf course, might be something that could be beneficial to the women's game.
Yeah, it's not something I've thought about that much, to be honest, but my initial thought would be they're better to be separated, because I think it's funny, because obviously there's a lot of talk about where the PGA Tour is going to go in the future, and kind of how you get all the best players in the world playing more often. But I think, like, fans can get oversaturated as well if you put too much too close together. And I think it's something like the Solheim Cup, the Ryder Cup, like, they're so unique to themselves. There's so much history with each event that is its own history, that I think it kind of might diminish either of them a little bit to, and I feel like the women's game is more likely to lose out in that situation, because it can feel like a bit of an add-on to something that is already one of the biggest kind of events in the sporting calendar. So I think they've earned their right to kind of exist on their own.
I know there's been a lot of talk, obviously, since September, Bethpage and the crowd behaviour and stuff like that. I remember certainly the last couple of Solheim Cups, it's been pretty heated between the players, but probably less so between fans. And I just wondered, again, I probably should have given this more thought, but Is there an angle there for the women's game? Is there, under new leadership, particularly on the LPGA Tour, fairly new leadership, to like lean into that sense of like, well, there's sort of keeping the decorum, but also making it more of a family-friendly thing? Because I think that's the big thing about the Ryder Cup, that I worry that it might put some people off taking their kids, whereas I don't think we've got there yet with the Solheim Cup, and it could be an angle to lean into in general for the women's game.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting conversation to have, because I think women's football probably is the one that is the biggest example of something like that. It has a very, very different audience from like a match going point of view to men's football. And I think trying to, all these sports, and golf is very much included in this, like they want to grow their audience, which is fine, and it needs to happen. But you have to also understand what draws people to it in the first place. And I don't think you're ever going to have exactly the same audience consume women's sports as men's sports, but that's also okay. Like, I don't think you need to try and make them the same. So if women's golf and Solheim is going to be more about maybe inspiring young golfers than, you look at the Phoenix Open is like the biggest example, than just trying to sell alcohol. Like, you're going to go about those two things quite differently. So I think it's a very, very hard balance to figure out, but I think you have to understand where your core audience is first before you try and build from
that. Sticking on that topic somewhat, Megan, how do you feel generally about the state of the women's game in 2026 versus say 10 years ago? Do you think it's moving in a good direction generally?
I think generally speaking, yeah, I think a lot of things have changed for the better. But then I'm sure you guys saw it. Like last night, you have Lydia Ko shooting 60. She's on 59 watch, and I've just seen Beth Ann Nichols kind of taking shots at the LPGA which is quite, it has to be bad for her to do that, because she's like very positive about the LPGA, as she should be. But it wasn't on TV. You've got like a Hall of Fame golfer, probably the most well-known women's golfer of this generation, on 59 watch, which only Annika Sorenstam has done in the history of the women's game. And like you can't see it. And worse than that, like the LPGA aren't tweeting about it, they're not posting about it, there's no videos. Like, it just, stuff like that blows my mind, because it feels like that's quite a simple thing to do something about. And yet, for all the progress that's been made, like that's still the reality. And it's just like, the product is there, like the stories are there, things are happening, and yet you're not, whether there's an audience there or not, you're not connecting the two things together. So I think that's why there's still like a massive amount to do. But there's obviously new people in place, there's new contracts up, so hopefully stuff like that will change, hopefully quite dramatically, quite quickly. But there's more money, there's more opportunity, there's definitely like a bigger platform than there's ever been before. I just hope that they can start to sell it and market it in a better way.
One question on the sort of the pathways then, Megan, and the sort of connection between those tours. Do you feel as an informed ladies European Tour golfer, like the pathway for you to get to the LPGA Tour, but also into the majors, do you feel like those pathways are appropriate at the moment, and that you've got like everything works in a sort of cohesive way? Because there's very different opinions in the men's game, particularly with the DP World Tour to the PGA Tour, but also, for instance, how you would access LIV. How do you feel about the pathways in the women's game at the moment?
I think it's much better than it used to be. So the top 10 players from the LET get access to the final stage of Q School to get their LPGA cards. So there is a pathway. I think it probably should be a bit more concrete than that. I feel like at the very least, the person who wins the Order of Merit should be given an LPGA card, because if you look at the players who have done that over the past 5 or 10 years, I think they're absolutely shown that they're worthy of competing on the LPGA and kind of having the opportunity to be some of the best players in the world. And Q School at the end of the day is just 1 week, and like so many things can happen. So I think maybe there should be a bit more reward from that point of view. And I think in the women's game, I know there's a lot of argument in the men's game about should the DP Tour be willing to lose their best players to the PGA Tour and stuff. But I also think it's just like the way life is. You can't have two primary tours, if you like. It's not going to work whenever people play all year round. And I also think on like a similar note that there maybe should be a little bit better access for European players to get into the majors. Because I think over the past 5 or 10 years, the LET has grown so much. Like it's so much stronger than it used to be. And you only have to look at the players who get their LPGA cards and what they go on to do to kind of see that I think they've earned their right to play amongst the best players in the world. So I just would like to see there be a bit more opportunity for the European players to actually compete against the best players in the world. So it's not like an isolated, okay, here's your one event of the year where you get to test yourself. There should be a little bit more fluidity between the two tours, I think.
I think you're spot on about the Q school thing, Megan, because it does feel like, if you're a player who's had a really solid season, you've worked your way into that opportunity, and you're just having a small bout of bad form, and 1 week you can't really tell anything. It has to be judged over the.
It might be a bit of an anomaly, but like the last two LET Order of Merit winners both didn't get their LPGA cards at Q School, which on one hand you could obviously argue is good for the LET because it means they come back to play the LET, but it's like, they've had their time on the LET, they've brought a lot to the LET and they've succeeded and grown as players and stuff, and they deserve, in my opinion, to go and test themselves against the best players in the world. But like you said, they have one slightly off week. It could be ill. I mean, I had COVID 1 year at Q School, and you're just like, okay, that's it. Like, you're done. So it is quite hard to then pin an entire person's career on 1 week.
I like that, what you said there, and actually it reminds me, I'm going to give Ben some credit again. That's the second time in one podcast that he said a similar thing about the DP World Tour is, it is the second tier, men's tour. There's no point in trying to pretend that it's on a level with the PGA Tour. It can't be feasibly. So, you have to play to the strengths of that tour. And if that means certain players have a way to access the PGA Tour, in a sort of formal way, then so be it. You can't sort of try and block them. It shouldn't work like that. Everyone has a right to earn their way up to the top, which is the PGA Tour. And I suppose the same would apply to the ladies' game. You may have answered this question a minute ago, but just in case there's anything else. So obviously we've got a relatively new commissioner on the LPGA Tour, and also a new commissioner for the Ladies European Tour coming in very soon in Tom Phillips. What changes would you like to see from them?
Yeah, I think on the LPGA side, it's probably difficult because I'm not playing out there. Like from like a more of a fan's point of view, I'd say the media coverage just they have to find a way to make that better. And I think they're already obviously trying to do that. And then from our point of view, I think more opportunities into the majors. Like, I don't know, maybe the US Open's always going to be a little bit of an isolated one, but I think there should be, because sorry, talking in circles a little bit here, but it's hard on the LET to get your world ranking to a certain point, because unless you are playing against better ranked players, you're always going to be limited slightly. And so a lot of the majors are based off world rankings, and it's like, well, you're only ever going to get 1 or 2 LET players earn their way into majors through that regard. And I think the LET's proved that it's getting more and more competitive. So I think, I think now's kind of the time to show that and to go, okay, we're going to give the top 5 or 10 players invites into the US Open or into the Chevron, or, because I understand the Chevron, for example, is in the US, but you end up with like over 100 LPGA players there. And I know the LET get 2 spots, I think. And it's just like, it feels like there should be a bit more of a way in. So I'd like to see that change a bit more. And then from the kind of week to week aspect, I suppose, the tour have done a good job of kind of getting more events, of getting bigger purses, but there's still quite a big disparity between the biggest events and the smallest events. And I think when you're traveling a long way to play for, a prize fund of 350,000 euros, it's stuff like that is still hard to manage. So unless you play well in the right tournaments, it's still, there's still a lot of girls who won't have a full-time caddy because you can't justify it. So I think just raising the professionalism levels in that regard, I think you can only do that by boosting the prize funds a little bit more.
Just to give us a sense on that, Megan, without you having to go into the details or reveal any financial information of your own, but like for you, when you go into one of those smaller events, what are we talking for you to break even? Are we talking 20th, 10th? Like, it's quite high up the leaderboard for you to actually come away from that event having quote unquote earned money that week, right?
Yeah, and it varies a lot because your costs can fluctuate so much depending on how much you want to invest in yourself. But like, I can give you an example from Australia because I've just done it. So like, we had 4 weeks. I didn't have a caddy 2 of the weeks, and then I had a caddy the second 2 weeks. And he was just like effectively a volunteer. So I paid him, like I still paid him, but not as much as I would pay if I had a full-time caddy with me. So the whole trip to be out there for 4 weeks has cost me about 8 grand, with like also having to change flights because of the fact there's a war going on. But like, so I've spent about 8 grand. If I'd brought a full-time caddy with me, you can up that to like 12 or so. Obviously sharing houses each week. So like costs are kind of down in that sense. And I came, I don't know, 37th, 2nd, 60th, and then 4th. So made all 4 cuts and had 2 like good weeks. And I've earned, I think, just under 50,000 euros. But once that gets taxed and levied, I'll get, I think, about £25,000. So I've made a profit on the trip, but I've had like 2 of my best results in like however many years. So you basically are looking at, if you finish top 5, you're going to make a profit no matter what in like a 350,000 event. But if you have a full-time caddy, you probably have to finish in the top, I don't know, 15 to make a profit. So I think it's just, like I said before, it's just very top heavy. Like you're relying on having a handful of very, very good weeks rather than what some people might think is acceptable career-wise, of having a bunch of made cuts and maybe like 30th place finishes, which like for me and for most people, it's not what you're aiming for. But you could also make an argument that if you finish 30th every week, you should be able to kind of make a decent living. So it's just
and just finally on that, when you are struggling, how difficult is it to I guess ideally you want to remove that from your thinking and your processes and everything, but it must be really hard to go out there struggling, knowing that, I could miss 4 cuts, I've spent 10 grand, and I can't imagine that must be difficult to play.
Yeah, it is. And that's why you get a lot of people, like, I almost couldn't go to Australia this year. And if it wasn't for my family, like, I wouldn't have gone, which changes my whole year. Like, it's easy to say now, but like at the start of the year, you're going, okay, like, I think I'm in a really good place with my golf. I think I can go out and be successful quickly, but I don't know that for certain. So can I afford to take 10 grand, whether I have that or if people have sponsors or somebody who's willing to help them out? It's like, can you justify that, knowing that you could miss 4 cuts in a row and you come home and you're 10 grand down, and you're also then like, okay, on the back foot, looking for points, looking for confidence and stuff. So it can catch up so quickly. And if you're not in like a stable financial position at the start of the year, it's almost impossible to play without thinking about that. And sponsorship in the women's game obviously is so hit and miss. Like a lot of people just meet somebody at their golf club and that's how it gets done, rather than kind of companies taking a chance on players. But I also understand, the financial reality is what it is, and it's not. The companies don't have to justify it either. So at the end of the day, you just have to try and find a way to make it work and play as well as you can.
Sticking on the theme of money, Megan, LIV Golf's new CEO, Scott O'Neill, mentioned the possibility of a women's LIV league in the future. Is that something you'd ever consider if it did happen? I'm presuming the purses would be considerably higher.
I don't know. That just like I've heard that kind of spoken about since LIV itself was kind of formed, and it just feels like it feels so far from the reality that we exist in that it doesn't really feel worth thinking about. And I think that's the thing that's hard about the women's game is, like, there's an event next week in Vegas. I actually don't know what the purse is. It might be maybe $2 million or something. And it's like it should be a great event because it's co-sanctioned with the LPGA. So it's going to have an amazing field. And I very nearly played my way into it, but because of the way the spots work, I didn't get in. But it's like a week like that financially, like you finish top 5 there, and it's like that's literally life changing. So it's such a like, I don't know, it's quite a polarizing world to live in, where it's like you can struggle for 6 months, be really, really worried about your future and about if you can afford to keep doing this. And then you get into a major or something and finish in the top 10, and all of a sudden you're looking at buying a house or something. Like it's just, it changes so quickly. And I think it's quite difficult in women's golf to understand how people decide where the value is, if that makes sense. Because something like LIV is just, there's a ton of money, they want to do what they want to do with it. But then sport in general, I think, is, it should be about the best players earn the most money. So it's just like, there's quite a lot of conflict, I think, going on, depending on how you look at it.
One more question, Megan, before you get to play highest bidder, which is basically why you came, I'm sure. The women's TGL is kicking off at the end of the year. Don't know if that, I have to confess, Sam, I didn't see the final, but congratulations to your team, whatever they're called, for winning it. Did they miss a trick, do you think, Megan, in not making it a mixed gender competition, first of all, whatever you think of it? Because it felt the obvious thing to, I think we discussed it, didn't we, Sam? Like, I'm so glad the Olympics seem to have, they have righted that wrong, because I think when the Olympics brought golf back, not having a mixed competition was an error. How do you, TGL's far less serious than that, but it seems a pity as well.
Yeah, my first instinct is completely the same, that I just don't understand if they're going to invite women and do it for women as well, which obviously I think is great that they're willing to do that. I don't know why you wouldn't put it together, because I'm the same as you. Like, I haven't really watched any of it. Like, it doesn't appeal to me at all. But that doesn't mean it doesn't appeal to other people. But it feels like a no-brainer to, especially because I think to be honest, there's not that many PGA Tour players that your average sports fan is going to know. And there's, I assume, even less female players. So you've got quite a small pool. So why you wouldn't make the pool bigger by putting them together, I don't understand. But hopefully it will turn some of the people who already have a little bit of marketability into, bigger stars and stuff. So that can only be a good thing. But
right, are you ready for this, Megan?
Hit me.
It's the highest bidder. It's the highest bidder. It's the highest bidder. It's the highest bidder.
Right, we're going back 10 years for this one, Megan, so we're going to test your memory, okay? Now, you were part of the winning team at the 2016 Curtis Cup. I would like to know how many of the opposition team, the US team, including the captain, can you name?
Oh my god. That is not good. I mean, I can name my own teammates, although I might struggle to get all of them.
Well, I deliberately didn't ask that because I thought that would be worse if you couldn't
Okay.
remember your own teammates.
Bethany Wu, was she one?
Yes.
I think I played
Sick.
her. Was Lilia Vu on the team?
She was not. I'm
You made
afraid.
it too hard, Sam. Immediately clear. This is too
one
hard.
out of, what, 12?
You can do your clues, Ben. You like giving clues, don't you?
Bailey Tardy. That's
Bailey
two.
Tardy, yes. Yep.
Well done.
I'm going to struggle to get any more. This is terrible. Okay,
I
can I
wish-
have some clues? It was a really young American team. I know that.
It was.
Yes.
We have a fairly recent PGA Tour winner. LPGA Tour winner. I'm trying to find out when she did win, but it's not going to help you massively. I'm
looking at the list here, and I can tell you that only 4 of the 8 have got Wikipedia pages, so that gives you an idea of.
Yeah, I mean, this is properly niche. This is properly niche. So. I think have you got the women? The European team. Sorry, Megan. Sam,
Wait, so are you letting me do the GB&I team instead?
I'm letting you do the GB&I team. I'm getting it in front of me. I can't
right.
believe I'm doing this to Sam because this is his baby. But here we go. Right, GB&I is in front of me now.
Is it 8 or 12?
It looks like 8. Yeah, it's 8 plus the non-playing captain.
Okay, the captain's Elaine Farquharson.
Correct. We're off to a flyer.
Okay, and then so we have me, Alice Hewson, Maria Dunn, Bronte Law, Leona Maguire, Charlotte Thomas, Olivia Mahaffey, and
It's great if you can't name one because that person's going to be really offended.
It's fine, I've got it. It's Rochelle Morris.
Well done. There we go.
Okay. You see
that's
that's too easy.
You're quietly fuming here.
Instead of the Americans. Can you tell me who the other Americans are?
Yeah, so
Yes.
the one I thought you would... Yeah. Sorry, Sam, you do it. You do it.
Well, okay, so the captain was Robin Burke. Then you got Sierra Brooks, Marielle Galdiano, Andrea Lee. She was probably the most obvious one, I suppose. Mika Liu, Hannah O'Sullivan, Bailey Tardy, who you got, Bethany Wu, who you got, and Monica Vaughan.
Oh yeah, no, I wasn't even close to being able to pull those names out.
It was tough, but I think Ben's gone too easy. I have to be honest. Maybe there was a middle ground that we didn't find.
Middle ground, yeah.
Well,
I can't even tell you what I know we won, but I don't know what the result was. I think we won by. It's quite close.
11 and a half, 8 and a half. But it was pretty close. We had a good finish to the singles, including your vital point against Bethany Wu. There you go.
Yeah, well, at least I remembered who I played against.
Well, we've reached the end of our hour, and it's been a fascinating hour, Megan. So thank you very much for joining us. And we wish you all the best for the rest of your season. You started really well. Hopefully that continues. Get into some majors, hopefully. And to our Slice listeners, we will be back on Monday with a regular episode.
Thank you, guys.